So this is my template. This was homework 8, was to get to this spot right here. And I saw a lot of you did a wonderful job. By the way, the homework 8s were awesome. They were really good outcomes. I was impressed. I was really impressed with the outcome. The next step was to take this layer, duplicate it. So I'm going to go to duplicate outline, rename it LP. So I'm working in a non-destructive way. I'm hiding my original live paint layer. I'm selecting this, and I'm going to turn it into a live paint group. Object, let me see here. Object, I'm getting tired. Make. So there it is. It's a live paint group. Now I can turn the blueprint on and go to the bucket and sample the colors and add the colors throughout the object. Now, once I complete this, you'll notice I still have the red lines. So I need to turn off those red lines in the same way that I just discussed in regards to the portrait. I'm going to select all of this line work and I'm going to set it to no strokes. I just want to see the fills. Okay? So ultimately what I should have is a live paint layer that looks something like this. Now I didn't do a great job. I can see I made some little mistakes, but I have a live paint layer that looks like this. So Thomas, this is what it should look like after I finish live painting my homework assignment. But I'm not done. I'm not done. If you read the homework handout, there's a couple of more steps that I'm suggesting that you take. Does anybody remember what those steps were? Can anybody help me? Some of you completed this. Well, I do want to add the trap around this. I call it the trap. Cartoon has a trap around it. But I don't do that through the live paint group. How do I add the trap? I dupe the outline layer. So I take my outline layer. You'll notice I have it highlighted. I'm going to go to the hamburger icon. And I'm going to select duplicate the outline layer. And I'm going to drag this above my live paint layer and turn it on. So in effect, what I have now is I have a trap layer and I have, let me rename this trap. I have a trap layer and I have a live paint layer. When I turn both those layers on, I see the trapping around the cartoon. Now the problem is the trap is not correct. What is the color of a trap normally around a cartoon? It's usually black. So since it's just regular paths, I can unlock the trap layer, select this stroke, and turn it to black. There, that trap line is done. I could select all of them and set them all to black. My trapping is done. Does that make sense? Now, knowing this cartoon, Rigby, there isn't a black line right here. So I'm just going to select it and delete it. He also doesn't have a line right here. I'm going to select it and delete it. So this circle, I used a circle to describe one of his eyes, but this line should not be right here. How do I correct that? How do I correct? This circle should stop. This trap should stop at his eyebrow. How do I get rid of this right here? I'm sorry? Nope, that's not going to help me. Thomas. Oh, there you go. That's a perfect answer. So I'm going to use the scissor tool. So the scissor tool is going to allow me to click on this edge and cut it. And click on this edge to completely or break that little segment apart. Right, now I didn't do a great job. I was a little inaccurate, but you can see I was able to cut a portion of that ellipse. So I would do that over here as well. So even though I've duplicated the outline layer, even though I made a duplicate and I set it as a trap and I turned it black, it doesn't mean that I'm done. I still might need to clean up my line work. some cartoons have a descriptive edge around the character. Maybe it looks like a calligraphy line. Rigby doesn't. It's pretty uniform. In his case, the lines have a little rounded end on it. But let's just say he had a calligraphy-like line around his trap. You know, I could go to the stroke and apply a profile with a calligraphy-like line. And now you'll notice that it sort of has that expressive quality along the edge of the cartoon. So what I would suggest is, if you're still working on the cartoon, which I think is due this week, I think homework 9 is due this week, you still have time to go in, if you haven't completed it yet, to go in and, you know, finish all of the details and the trapping around Rigby. So, not Rigby, or your cartoon. You'll also notice that Rigby has some details, kind of like a crosshatch effect that describes his fur, right? So if I wanted to add that detail, what I would do is I would make a new layer, and I would call that layer my detail layer. And I would go ahead on that detail layer and replicate all of those little details. Now I'm pretty methodical, so and I'm also, not only am I methodical, I'm pretty consistent. So I'm going to draw these the same way that I do anything else. I'm going to start off with a red line and capture all of these little details along his body. Does that make sense? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select those and then maybe add the correct color. Maybe I'll use the eyedropper, or maybe there's a brown or a color that's already here. And I'm going to design that detail to look correct. That's a little too wide, so maybe it's 1 point. And the detail also looks too sharp on the end. I know that in his case, his character has a rounded cap. It's going to look something like that. That's going to have more of the finished quality that his character has. See how it has a roundness to it? Does that answer your question, Thomas, of how to complete the homework? Okay. Any other questions about this? Yes.
When we were doing one of the first assignments, which was like the Mickey Mouse,
Mm-hmm.
his cousin or something, and you like merged two different shapes together, so it like connected the lines.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for his eyes, how do you do that?
For his eyes, how do I do that?
For the like the dark brown.
Okay. Really good question. I like that question.
I forget how you do
All right. So you'll notice that, so her question is, well, you know, I know that you use live paint, and because of that, when I see just the line work, I can see that they are separate shapes. The goggles, or like his eyes, are separate shapes. There's a shape here, there's a little intersection. What if I wanted to merge these all into one? Not only that, like this part of his eyes, you'll see that it's a separate little piece, but it's really part of his forehead. Okay, so how do I sort of connect all of this stuff? Well, first of all, it's still a live paint group, so I can't connect it yet. I need to turn it into a vector. So how do I turn this into a vector? Do you remember? We just talked about it. Expand. So I need to hit this expand button to turn it into a vector. I've also haven't finished it. You notice I'm missing a little spot there. So I'm going to make sure that I do this right. Fill that little spot in. And if I want to expand it, I need to duplicate this. So duplicate, call this expand, or expanded. Lock the original live paint group and hide it. So I'm only working on this layer. I'm going to hit the expand button. Now when you expand, you'll notice that it puts it in a group. And this is problematic. So I don't like leaving my expanded content in a group, so I am going to ungroup it. So now that it's ungrouped, I can select the individual little pieces. Okay, so check this out. There is a little piece right here that really is part of his forehead. I wish these two were connected together. Can anybody tell me how I can connect this little piece with this piece? Make it one object. Anybody remember what the tool is called? Who said that? You're answering all the questions. It's called the Pathfinder. It's called the Pathfinder. So if I go to the window menu, I'm going to select the Pathfinder, and I'm going to select Unite. Now here's something that you should all be aware of, though. Sometimes when two objects are perfect, sort of like perfectly rendered, and they're sharing an edge, these two they're not overlapping. They're both sitting right on the edge of one another. The Pathfinder doesn't understand that they are there with the intent to merge. So it ignores the function. So sometimes the Pathfinder works, sometimes it doesn't work. So let me click the Pathfinder button, see if it works. Oh, see, it didn't work. All right, so sometimes the Pathfinder doesn't work. Let me do that again, let me try. Oh, that time it worked. So you'll notice I just undid and redid. Sometimes that cleans it up. Let's say it didn't clean it up. The Pathfinder doesn't work. What do I do then? Well, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but you'll notice that the Live Paint bucket and the Live Paint selection tool is partnered with this object right here. What is this tool called? Shape Builder. Okay, so whenever I have objects selected and I go to the Shape Builder, you'll notice that it understands. It puts a little screen over the objects I have selected. And you'll notice that the cursor shows a what next to the arrowhead? A plus. So this is an interactive Pathfinder. This wants to merge this shape to this. How do I merge them? I basically hold my mouse down and drag this shape into this one. See how it draws a little line? And when I let go, it merges them together. So I can do that from this shape to this shape as well. So let me start from scratch, all right? So you'll notice here's a little fragment, and here's a bigger piece. I'm going to shift click those 4 pieces. You can say I have them all selected. I'm going to go to the Shape Builder, and I'm going to drag from here to here. I'm going to drag from here to here. Now I've just merged those. So I can apply that same tool to these little fragments that make up the sort of mark around his eyes. All right, so I shift click those, drag from here to there, drag from here there to there. Now it's one shape. What a great tool, right? It's a great tool. And that is, you know, the nature of the Live Paint, where it leaves these little pieces separated. This allows me to correct that. Okay. You're welcome. Any other questions? No? So if this doesn't make sense now, or you don't have a context for it, in other words, you're not here yet, but maybe later, that's why I'm posting the videos. So that way, if it's something that you need later, you can go back to these videos and watch them again. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. So since we're done reviewing homework 9 and Live Paint, we basically have been focusing on a lot of Live Paint stuff and sort of the outcomes of it and other tools that revolve around Live Paint. You know, I'm really happy that we were able to have this conversation.